Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for your, you know, uh, such a warm response to our seminar. During COVID, we used to have every month one seminar, and we have decided that we'll restart that. So to start off with, we have taken a very simple and a very basic topic, reverse charge mechanism under GST. Not very complex topic, but that is something which bothers us, and especially after the GST audit has started, almost all the cases where we see which we are handling or where we get involved, we see that the standard point which is there with either the state or the center is that you have not discharged taxes under reverse charge mechanism on certain transactions. So we thought, let's take this very important topic because it's revenue neutral. The moment I pay the tax as cash, I will get the input tax credit. Okay, so that's why we thought we'll take this topic. Thank you very much for joining in such large numbers. I can see almost more than 120 participants are there, and I'm hoping that that number will only increase as the time passes. Thank you very much, guys. Okay, so without spending a lot of time on introductions, let's start off with the presentation only directly. Reverse charge mechanism under GST. My colleague uh, Amarnath will be helping me with the PPT because GST and the technology does not go hand in hand. So to ensure that there's no technical hitches, I asked him to handle the presentation. So Amarnath, if you can help us move to the next slide. Amarnath, you can move to the next slide. Just give me a second. Just give us a second. I think the problem is resolved. I'm sorry for the delay. So generally, if you look at the indirect taxes, there's a supplier, there is a receiver. The supplier is a person who is required to collect the taxes from the recipient, that is the customer, and pay that to the government. And whether he collects it from the recipient or not, the tax liability is on that person only who is the supplier of the goods, and he is required to discharge that obligation. Okay? But in certain cases where government believes that they will not be able to collect the taxes from the supplier, what they do is they ask for payment of tax under reverse charge mechanism, that is from the recipient. Now that reminds me of a very some historical event here as far as service tax is concerned. Okay, so in one of the budget, the finance minister proposed levy of service tax on goods transport agencies. So all the truck owners had to pay taxes on the freight which they were collecting. Okay. Now, at that point of time, all the truck owners stopped their vehicle wherever they were, and they said, "We don't like this service tax levy, and we are going on strike, and we are not going to move our vehicle." And that is when, for 8 to 10 days, the strike was there. Now, okay, somebody said the voice is not clear. Is it better now? So at that point in time, the for 10 days nothing moved, neither the groceries, nor the milk, nor the vegetables, nor the newspapers. And that's when finance minister has to come down and say, I am removing or withdrawing or rolling back. Uh, Somebody is saying volume is very low. I hope this is better now. Okay. So that's when the finance minister had to roll back that levy. Okay. And after that, in the subsequent budget, okay, he introduced GST under reverse charge, sorry, service tax under reverse charge mechanism on goods transport agency. And that's when the concept of reverse charge came into picture in service tax. And the same thing has been extended even GST. So GST has reverse charge mechanism both on goods and services. On 1st July 2017, there were two sections, section 9 subsection 3 and section 9 subsection 4. Okay, let's forget all the sections. There were two kinds of RCM. One is RCM on notified transactions. That is, government will issue a notification, and on those notifications, I am required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Second, if a registered person procures any goods or services from an unregistered person, then by default on that purchases from the unregistered person, he is required to discharge tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. This second reverse charge mechanism, there were a lot of issues and apprehensions, and so the GST Council decided that they will defer that levy of collection of taxes under reverse charge mechanism on purchases made from unregistered dealers. And December 13, 2017 is when that entire notification was scrapped. So from 1st July 2017 to 12th of October 2017, there was a levy where whenever I collect anything, whenever I make payments from whenever I purchase anything from a unregistered person, I was required to pay tax. Okay. Even now I get questions that I am making purchase from an unregistered dealer. Am I required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism? The answer is no. You are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism because you are making procurements from an unregistered person. You are required to make payment under reverse charge mechanism only on those transactions which are specifically notified. So once a transaction is notified, whether the person is registered or unregistered, you are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Merely because the person is unregistered, you are not required to pay, right? You are required to pay only if that service has been notified. Otherwise, you are not required to pay. Right? I hope that is very clear, because somebody at the beginning of the session itself has said, please give clarity on the procurements being made from the unregistered persons. Okay. Amarnath, next. Okay. Yeah, one more, please. Yeah, sufficient. Okay. Now, when a levy is created under reverse charge mechanism, then instead of supplier being treated as a person who is required to discharge tax, the recipient is treated as the supplier and he is required to discharge the tax. Okay. And in his returns, he has to very clearly report. There is a separate table in GSTR 3B where we'll have to clearly report that he is paying this much amount of taxes on account of reverse charge mechanism. And that liability can be discharged only by cash. Even if you have huge amount of input tax credit, you are required to discharge the tax only by cash. And if you are eligible to claim input tax credit, then definitely you will be able to claim the input tax rate of the same. Now, why do I say eligible for? Because if you have procured something which is going to be used for exempt purposes, then you're not going to get the input tax credit. Okay, so whatever criteria are applicable for forward tax charge which you have paid, same thing will apply even for reverse charge transactions. Okay. Now, again, to reiterate, all URD purchases are not liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism. Next, Amarnath. Only notified transactions are liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism. So in today's presentation, we are going to focus only on those notified categories of services on which we are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Right. Next. Okay. So I've categorized all the services into few 10 category, few 10 particulars which we have to take care of, and each of the service we are going to test on these parameters. Okay. Next. So the first category which we are going to examine is nature of service being goods transport agency services. So first category which we are going to discuss today is goods transport agency services. Now, what do you mean by goods transport agency services? Goods transport agency services means I want to transport goods from place A to place B. My office is in Bangalore and I want to move the goods to my customer who is in Chennai. In that case, I am going to hire a person who is going to transport the goods from my godown or my warehouse to my customer's warehouse. The truck owner is called a goods transport agency if he issues a consignment note. Okay, there's a specific format in which consignment note is to be issued. So if I hire the services of this truck owner who issues a consignment note to me, okay, which looks like a lorry receipt, okay, and also in his invoice he clearly says that he has not opted for payment of tax under forward charge mechanism, then the recipient is required to pay tax. So let's take an example. Let's continue our example. I am a company situated in Bangalore. I have a customer who is also a company situated in Chennai. Okay, I hire say VRL Transport for movement of goods from Bangalore to Chennai, and he gives me a consignment note. Okay, as per the terms of the agreement, I am required to make payment to the transporter. When I am required to make payment to the transporter, I become the recipient of service. I am required to discharge the tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay, but if the person, if as per the contract, my customer in Chennai is required to pay the transporter, then he becomes the recipient of service and he is required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay, so now it becomes very important for us to understand who is a service receiver. There are two things which we have to remember. The person who pays the consideration will be called a service receiver, and that service receiver should be a specified person. That means he should be one of the 7 categories mentioned in the notification. The most common category is company or any person registered under the GST law, or a partnership firm, or a factory, or a society, or a cooperative society. Okay, so if the recipient of the service, that means the person who is paying consideration to the transporter, is either a company or a partnership firm, or he is registered under the GST law, he will be treated as a service receiver who is required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay, is there any specific exemption available for GTA? If I am transporting agricultural produce or military equipments or any relief material, in that case specific exemption is available. Okay, we will have to go through the notifications. I will not be going through each of the notifications relating to exemption, but whatever is important is what I'm going to cover. Okay, now, is specific exemption available? For very few categories of commodities, exemption is available, where even if I engage a goods transport agency, I am not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Now, when I engage the goods transport agency and I pay tax under reverse charge mechanism, am I entitled to claim the credit? Yes, I am entitled to claim the input tax credit. What is the rate of tax? The rate of tax is 5%. So when the receiver pays the tax, the rate of tax is 5%. Now, here also one interesting aspect which we have to note: the service provider has two rates, 12% or 5%. So if he pays tax at the rate of 12%, he will be entitled to input tax credit of the lorries purchased by him. Or he can opt for 5%, he will not get input tax credit. Or third, he can opt not to charge the tax at all. In that case, the transaction will not be under forward charge mechanism, it will become liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism. So just for the at the cost of repetition, the supplier decides whether the transaction will be liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism or not. If he has chosen that he will pay the tax under forward charge mechanism, then the liability does not fall on the recipient. Now, how will an innocent recipient get to know whether he is required to discharge tax under reverse charge mechanism or not? Very simple. Please look at his invoice. He has to mention on the invoice whether he is charging tax under forward charge mechanism or he is not charging tax under forward charge mechanism. If he is not charging tax under forward charge mechanism, but he is merely mentioning the tax, I am saying the recipient is required to pay tax, and a tick box is there in the box. Okay, in that case, you as a recipient is required to pay tax. Okay, but if the declaration is there that he is paying tax under forward charge mechanism, then you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism because he has taken the obligation of discharging the tax. Okay, again, one more interesting question which comes up is, okay, I am the recipient, the GTA is not paying the tax, I am required to pay tax, I am paying tax at 5%, can I claim input tax credit? Yes, please look at the notification. The notification says if the supplier opts to pay tax at 5%, then any input or input services used for providing that service, you will not get the input tax credit. But I, as a recipient, do not have any input or input services which have been used for providing that service. I am the recipient of the service, so that restriction of input tax credit is not applicable to me. Restriction of input tax is only on the procurements of the GTA, not on the procurements of the recipient. So recipient, even though he is paying tax at the rate of 5%, he will be entitled to claim input tax rate of the same. Okay, what is the value on which taxes are required to be discharged? Whatever the supplier charges on his invoice or bill of supply, On that value, 5% is required to be discharged. There is no artificial inflation of the value. Okay. Few additional points which we have to take care of when we are dealing with goods transport agency. Earlier, okay, that is up to 2021, October 2021, there was a specific exemption which said that if when you are loading the goods and your consignment, the transportation charges for the consignment is less than 750 rupees, or you have hired the entire lorry, and for the entire lorry, the entire trip, the charges are less than 1500 rupees, you are not required to pay GST under reverse charge mechanism. Please be careful, that exemption has been removed. I'm sorry, I said October 2021 and October 2022. Okay, that exemption was removed. So that means even if it is a 1 rupee transportation, you will have to pay taxes under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Now, how do I identify this transaction? Please have a look at the transportation charges ledger, because that's where this account, this expense will be debited in your account. So that's where you will have to be careful when you're reviewing your transportation charges to check whether a particular party is a GTA or not a GTA, and whether taxes have been charged by him. If he is not charged, should I be required to pay taxes under reverse charge mechanism? Okay. Now that is as far as GTA is concerned. Now, Amarnath, if I can request you to move to the next slide. Okay. So next we come to legal services. Now, what do you mean by legal services? Meaning, just on a lighter side, does not mean everything else is illegal. Legal services means services in the field of law. Any services in the field of law will be called as legal services. If the service provider is an advocate, a senior advocate, or a firm of lawyers, and they provide legal services to whom? To a business entity, then the tax is required to be discharged by the business entity. Please observe here, in the earlier case, the service receiver should have been a specified person, but here the service receiver is said to should be a business entity. Now, who is a business entity? Any person who is engaged in business is called a business entity. But luckily, a specific exemption has been given, which says that if your turnover in the last year is less than the registration threshold, so some people have a registration threshold of 20 lakhs. Okay, but if you're dealing only in goods, intrastate supply of goods, the threshold limit extends to 40 lakh rupees. So if your last year's turnover is less than 20 lakhs or 40 lakh rupees, okay, respectively, then you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Very interesting point here is that assuming your turnover is 20 lakh, last year was 15 lakhs, and current year also is 15 lakhs, and you engage the services of a lawyer for the purpose of business, okay, and you're registered also under the GST law. Now, this specific exemption does not say that if you are registered, you are required to pay tax. It only says if your last year's turnover is below the threshold limit, you are not required to pay tax. Which means even if you are registered under the GST law, but if your turnover in the last year is less than 20 lakhs or 40 lakhs limit, you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Now, assuming the tax was applicable to you and you have paid that tax, is the credit available? Yes, it is in relation to business, so the credit is available. What is the rate of tax? 18% is the rate of tax which you will have to discharge. Okay. What is the value? Whatever the lawyer charges you, including the expense which he charges you, on that taxes are required to be discharged under reverse charge mechanism. One important point, if a lawyer renders services other than legal services, like I said, it does not mean it is illegal services. Assuming your landowner is a lawyer, now he is providing other than legal services, because he is giving you not legal services, he is giving you a renting of immovable property services. In that case, he has to obtain registration if he satisfies all the conditions of registration for getting the registration done, and he has to pay tax under forward charge. You don't have to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism, because RCM is applicable only for legal services rendered by advocate, not on renting of immovable property services rendered by legal lawyers. Okay. The renting of immovable property could be a wrong example, because we have RCM even for that as a separate category. So for safety purposes, we will discuss this renting of immovable property as commercial property. Okay, if a lawyer has given you a commercial property on rent, then he is required to pay tax under forward charge mechanism. How do you identify this transaction? It will be parked in legal and professional charges in your books of accounts. Okay, next. The third category which we are going to take is sponsorship services. Okay, sponsorship service is very interesting. Because when we ask question on who is the sponsor and who is the sponsoree, that is when confusion starts. Okay, so let's take an example. Okay, there is IPL which is going to be launched very soon. It's going to be telecasted very soon, free of cost on Geo. Okay, now BCCI is organizing this IPL, right? Okay, and when BCCI organizes this IPL, assuming Paytm is sponsoring the event, so that means it will become Paytm IPL. At this point in time, please note that Paytm is the sponsorer and BCCI is providing sponsorship services to Paytm. Okay. Now, when BCCI says you are required to pay me 100 crores for sponsoring the IPL, the expense will be booked in the books of Paytm as sponsorship services. Okay. Now, because Paytm is a body corporate, that means it is a company or it is a partnership firm, they are required to discharge the tax under reverse charge mechanism. So the liability will now shift from BCCI, who is the supplier, to Paytm, who is the recipient. Okay. There is a specific exemption which has been given here. When you sponsor a recognized sporting event, so when BCCI organizes World Cup, which is a recognized sporting event, the sponsoring entity is not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism because there is an exemption available. Okay, but IPL is not a recognized sporting event, and so it will be liable to tax. Right now, if Paytm pays this money under reverse charge mechanism, will they be entitled to claim the credit? Yes, it is business promotion expenditure. They will be entitled to claim the input tax credit of the same. What is the value on which tax is required to be discharged? Whatever value the BCCI charges or whatever is the bid amount which has been accepted by Paytm, on that value GST is required to be discharged under at the rate of 18%. Okay. Next, where will you see this expense? It will be sitting mostly in business promotion expenditure. Next, the fourth category. Okay, very interesting. Any service other than renting provided by whom? A central government, state government, union territory, or a local authority. So if the provider is a central government, state government, union territory, or local authority, and you are availing those services other than renting, because renting there is a separate slide, you being a business entity, don't be happy that government does not charge GST. They have not charged because you are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. And what do you mean by business entity? Any person who does business. Okay. There's a specific exemption. There are a lot of exemptions on government services. So you will have to go through all those exemptions. Very important exemptions. Okay. Assuming you have paid MCA filing fees. Okay, that is a service which government has rendered. 100 rupees, 200 rupees, 500 rupees. If the value of the service is less than 5,000 rupees, you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Second, if you are a business entity having a turnover in the last year below the threshold limit, the same discussion what we had for legal services, even then, even if you are registered under the GST law, you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Likewise, there are so many other exemptions which are available, like any services relating to registration. Okay, you are not required to obtain, you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Any services for which you have paid fees, which is compulsory under some law, okay, for the purpose of safety of the customers or the employees, like you take a boiler license, okay, for the purpose of keeping the safety of the employees or the customers who come into the hotel, you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism, right? Liquor license, anyways, they have given an exemption, blanket exemption, so I'm not required to pay tax on the liquor license purchase. Okay. Now, if I have paid, am I entitled to claim the input tax credit? Yes, because it qualifies to be a business expenditure for me. Rate of tax, there is no change in rate of tax. The mean rate of tax will apply, which is 18%. What is the value? Whatever amount the government charges, that is the charge I am required to pay tax on. Okay. Anything else which I have to keep in mind apart from telling Amarnath to change the slide? Yes, thank you, Amarnath. Okay. Anything else which I have to keep in mind is that if back Amarnath, back. Okay. If the government authority is providing service to me because of a constitutional obligation, okay, because constitution says that that authority is required to do something specifically, in that case exemption is available. Okay, so you can go to the 12th schedule to the constitution, which gives list of activities which a local authority is supposed to do. If that activity which you are talking about fits into those 12th schedule, then you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism because that is treated as a sovereign function. Okay, now where do you find these expenses? You will find expenses in if we don't know where to debit a expenditure, we'll debit it to rates and taxes. So all the government fee will be sitting in rates and taxes. Okay. Are there any few examples which we can think of where the government renders services? So many examples. I can give you so many examples. Okay. Example, assuming the Indian Railways. Okay, I want to advertise in Indian Railways, inside the railways, outside the railways, or on the platform. Okay, the money which I pay to railways is the service rendered by the central government to me, on which they are not going to charge me tax. I am required to pay tax on the same under reverse charge mechanism. Okay, uh, a very disputed topic, but if a mining right is given to me or telecommunication license rights are given to me, right? Those are the services which government has given to me. Again, the mining, the royalty which I pay for mining, is it a service or is it a tax? Is a question before Supreme Court. So as of now, we don't know the answer. Telecommunication licenses given to the telecommunication companies by the government is liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Now we move to renting of movable property, which is given by the government. So if you have seen all this GST department, okay, right? Most of the central GST department, you will see the offices are above BMTC bus stand. Okay, so BMTC bus stand belongs to a state government. They have given the property on rent to the central government, which is CGST office. Apart from that, in the last floor, there is a company also, okay, which has taken the property on rent from BMTC. So when BMTC rents out this immovable property to the company on the third floor, okay, the company is required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism on the amount collected by BMTC from them. Okay, if he is a registered person. So look at the difference between the earlier slide and this slide. In the earlier slide, which was any services other than renting, you should have been a business entity. Okay, but if you are a business entity having a turnover less than the threshold, you are not required to pay tax. In this case, whether your turnover is less or your turnover is more, as long as you are a registered person under the GST law, you are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. What is the rate of tax? 18%. Can I claim the input tax rate? Yes, you can claim the input tax rate. What is the value? Whatever BMTC charges me, I am required to pay tax on the same. Any additional points which I am required to remember? That even if my turnover is below the threshold limit, exemption will not apply for renting of movable property. Okay, where do I find these expenses? Either it will be in rates and taxes or renting, hiring, leasing. Right? Okay, next. Again, we are talking about renting of residential dwelling, but this is for residential purposes. Okay, this notification was issued very, very recently. Okay, so what it says is renting. So before this, let's look at some background of this entry. Okay, before the amendment was made and this entry was bought under reverse charge mechanism, renting of residential dwelling for residential purposes was exempt from tax. So renting residential dwelling, residential purposes, triple R. Okay, it was exempt from tax. Whether it is given to an individual, that is me, who want to use it for residential purposes, or given to me as a company who wants to use it as a guest house, or given to me as a company where the director is going to stay. Any purpose I use it, if the end uses residential purpose, it was exempt from tax. Okay, renting of a residential dwelling for residential purposes. Commercial property given for residential, taxable. Residential property given for commercial purposes, taxable. I have to satisfy all the three conditions, only then exemption will be was available. Okay, then a lot of issues started coming up when you run a PG, you run a hostel, it is for commercial purposes, it is not for residential purposes. Should we levy tax or not? Karnataka High Court gave a very beautiful judgment, okay, where they said that whether it is hostel or PG, the end use is residential only, and hence exemption has to be given even for the end use relating to hostel or PG. To overcome that decision, a amendment was made to the exemption notification as well as to the RCM notification. Now exemption has been restricted to renting of residential dwelling for residential purposes given to any person not being a registered person. So now, if I go to my landlord, okay, and I take the property on rent, okay, he should ask me whether I'm registered under the GST law or not. If I'm not registered under the GST law, then neither will he pay the tax nor will I pay the tax. That will continue to be exempt. Okay, but if he gives me a residential property on rent, okay, and I am a registered person, then I am required to pay tax on the same under reverse charge mechanism. Clear? So now, if a company takes the property on rent, okay, for use for by the director, for use by the employees, for use by as a guest house, for whatever purposes, because that company is registered, they are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Incidentally, in all the WhatsApp group, a very interesting question came up. I am a chartered accountant, okay, who is registered under the GST law. Okay. Now I don't have a own house, so I am taking a property on rent. So it is renting of residential dwelling for residential purposes only. My family is only going to stay there. But because I am registered under the GST law, should it be liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism? Luckily, to clarify this issue, a circular was issued and also an explanation was inserted in the notification where they said if that residential dwelling is being used for the personal purposes, not being official purposes, for personal purposes of the person, even if he is registered in law for some other purposes, he is not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. The exemption will still continue. Okay. So if an individual takes the property on rent for his personal purposes, it will not be liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Next. Rate of tax, if I have to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism, 18%. Value, whatever the landlord charges me. Okay. Personal capacity not liable to tax, but what happens if I recover something? This totally different question. I am a company, I have taken the property for renting it out or giving it to my employees. Okay. So I will pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. And now when I'm giving it on rent to my employees, that becomes my outward supply because I'm recovering the money from them. So it will become liable to tax again in my hands under forward charge. Right? Okay. Again, next point, can I claim input tax credit? I believe that credit will be available, but GST authorities are denying the credit on the ground that the house which has been taken by the company is being used for personal consumption of the director and hence the credit should not be available. I do not agree with this argument because according to me, once a company has taken a particular property on rent, it is for its business purpose only. Even though the director might be using it, it cannot be said that it is a personal purpose of the director. Company cannot have any personal purpose. Company has appointed a director and they have decided they will give salary plus perquisites in the form of one house. So that is the expenditure of the company, which is for the purpose of business, for the in the course or furtherance of business, and so it should not be liable to. It should not. The credit should not be denied in the hands of the company, is what I believe. Now, how just one second, Anna. How do I identify these expenses? These expenses generally will be sitting either in staff welfare expenses or it will be sitting under renting of immovable property, renting, hiring, or leasing ledgers. Right? Okay. Next. The next transaction is directorship services. It's not dictatorship services, it's directorship services, which we are talking about. Who is the service provider? Director. Who should be the service receiver? Body corporate, because only body corporate are entitled to have director. I might be a sole proprietor. In my visiting card, I can say executive director, non-executive director, but I am actually not a director. In a company, there is a requirement to appoint a director. So we are talking about only that kind of a director. Okay. Is there an exemption? No exemption. Any company who pays money to the director, either as sitting fee or any other way, is required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Are they entitled to claim input tax rate? Yes, they are entitled to claim the input tax rate of the same. What is the rate at which the tax is required to be discharged? They have to discharge the tax at the rate of 18%. What is the value? The value of fees which has been paid to the director. Now, here a very interesting point which comes up is, if you go to Schedule 3, the first line item, Schedule 3 says, the following are the transactions which will neither be treated as supply of goods nor be treated as supply of services. Right? Okay. So the first line item, the Schedule 3 says, any transaction by where in the course of an employment contract, the employee provides the services to the employer. Okay, employee provides the services to the employer. It is not liable to GST, and that is why salary paid by the employer to the employee in the course of employment is not liable to GST. Okay, so likewise here also we can distinguish the director into two. One, executive director and one non-executive director. Now, how do I bifurcate between a director being an executive or a non-executive director? One, under which section of income tax are you deducting TDS? Now, pardon my ignorance of income tax law, but I am told salary is covered under 192, and if it is other than salary, it will be 194J. I am subject to corrections, but that's what I am told. So, if you are deducting the TDS under the chapter salaries, that means he's an executive director, it will get covered under Schedule 3. So, you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay, but if you are deducting the TDS under 194J, that means he is acting in his professional capacity. He is not your employee, he is a consultant. You are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism on the money paid to such director. Okay. Plus, if the director, not in his capacity as a director, is providing any services to you. Example, he's a professional, he gives an opinion to you, or he's an architect, he gives some architect services to you, or the property where you have taken your office belongs to the director and you're paying him rent. In that case, he is not working in the capacity of the director. He is working in the capacity as a third party, as a landowner, as an architect, as a consultant. In these cases, the director only will have to pay tax under forward charge mechanism. I am not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. So please identify the relationship for all the payments which you are making to the director. If it is for the directorship services, reverse charge. If it is not for the directorship services, it will not be liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism. If the director has a turnover more than 20 lakhs, if it is not specifically exempted, he will have to charge the tax to you. And irrespective whether he charges or you charge, credit will be available to you because it is in relation to business. Okay, where will all these expenses be sitting? Director sitting fee or legal and professional charges. And because he is a significant person in the management, the fee paid to him requires a separate disclosure in notes to account. So there also you will find these details. Now let's look at security services. Okay, a friend actually came up with a very interesting way of looking at this security services. He said, what do you mean by security services? Firewalls also provide security. So then, the notification had to actually be amended. Maybe they were listening to him. Deputation of personnel for the purpose of providing security is called security services. So when the service provider is a person other than the body corporate, so that means he should not be a company, and the service receiver is a registered person. If you observe, each of the service has a different person as a service provider and each as a receiver. If you go to sponsorship services, service receiver should have been a body corporate or a partnership firm. If you come to security services, service receiver has to be a registered person. It can be an individual who is registered, still liable to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay, because he might be receiving services from an individual. So assuming there is an individual who is providing security services to me and I'm registered under the GST law, I'm an individual, still I'm required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. But if I hire a company who is providing security services to me, then even though I'm registered, I'm not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism because the service provider now is a body corporate. So reverse charge mechanism will come into picture only when I'm receiving services from a person who is not a body corporate. Right? Okay. Specific exemption, security provided to educational institutions is not liable to tax under GST. So educational institutions are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Now, assuming I'm required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism because I'm not an educational institution, is credit available? Yes, credit is available because it's one of the essential expenses for carrying on my business. What is the rate of tax? 18%. There could be a repetition at a lot of places, but there are cases where this 18% will change to 5%, credit will change to not available, value will change. That's why I bought in these bonds. Okay, value, whatever is charged by the supplier. One interesting point here, I don't know why they created an exception here and not everywhere else, is that if security services are rendered to a person who is registered under the GST law and paying tax under composition scheme, then the person registered under the composition scheme is not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. I would think this is really very interesting because unfortunately, even if he pays that tax under reverse charge mechanism, he will not get input tax credit. Okay? But this exception has been carved out only in security services. Unfortunately, in all the other cases, the composition scheme dealer will end up paying tax at the highest rate, which is 18%, and still not be entitled to claim the input tax credit of the same. Okay, accounting head, where will you get these expenses? Of course, it will be in security services only, right? Okay, next. We move to the next line item, renting of motor vehicles. Okay, there's a possibility of confusion. There are two categories of services: renting of motor vehicle and passenger transport services. Okay, very clear. The recent circular also says RCM is applicable only on renting of motor vehicles and not on passenger transport services. Okay, now who should be the service provider? Service provider should be any person other than a body corporate. Again, here the service provider is other than a body corporate, and like GTA, okay, the renting of motor vehicles has two options: either to pay tax at 12% or to and claim input tax rate on the car purchased by them, or opt to pay tax at 5%. But interestingly, unlike GTA, if you find a cab owner who wants to charge tax at the rate of 5%, then you have to tell him, boss, the rate of tax is not 12%, it is 5%. So that means I will have to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. You don't pay the tax. In GTA, the GTA owner can decide whether he wants to pay tax at the rate of 12% in the forward charge or 5% in the forward charge. In renting of motor vehicles, if he charges tax at the rate of 12%, RCM is not applicable. If he does not charge the tax or wants to charge the tax at 5%, it will be liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism if the recipient is a body corporate. Now look at the difference between security services and renting of motor vehicle. In renting of motor vehicle, the service receiver should be a body corporate. In security services, the service receiver was required to be a registered person. So you have to be very careful who should be the provider, who should be the receiver. Maybe at the beginning of the year, we can do analysis because my vendor for renting of motor vehicle may not change. Security will definitely not change. Okay, so identify whether I fall under RCM or not. Communicate to the security agency that you are not required to pay tax because it is covered under RCM and I will pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay, very important. If you see there is a change here, credit availment, there is a specific restriction under section 17 subsection 5 which says renting, hiring, leasing of motor vehicle, you will not get the credit. Okay, all that cases till now we were saying credit is available. Here there is a specific blocking of credit, so credit will not be available in the hands of the recipient even though he is paying tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay, what is the rate of tax? Only 5%. It's not 12%. Okay, what is the value on which tax is required to be charged? Tax is required to be paid whatever we pay to the supplier, including the toll. Even if we are paying the toll to him, even on that I am required to pay tax. Okay, now again coming back to what is the difference between renting of motor vehicle and passenger transport vehicle. Assuming you are taking a vehicle, okay, which has a scheduled point of departure and scheduled time of departure, you're using it for moving from your office to your house, like a BMTC bus. Okay, that is not renting of motor vehicle, that is a passenger transport service. RCM will not apply. But if you call Ola, Ola anyways is liable to tax, Ola will pay the tax, so Ola is wrong example. Say you have Vaishnavi Tours and Travels, one driver is a very good friend of yours, okay, or SLV Tours and Travels, but the driver is a very good friend of yours. Now you decide when he has to come, you decide the route, you decide how many stops you want to make. You want to pick up groceries on the way, you want to pick up your relative, your friend on the way, you want to stop for a smoke for 5-10 minutes. Okay, you decide the entire, the vehicle is totally under your control in that case, and whether you use that control or not, okay, secondary. Okay, so that is called renting of motor vehicle. You want to get a drop to airport, so you call that driver, okay, and he drops you to the airport. Okay, you decide the time. Okay, those are called renting of movable property, where you are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Passenger transport vehicle, passenger transport services, a circular has been issued very clearly which says you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. That means the provider either will have to pay tax at the rate of 12% with the benefit of input tax rate, or he will pay tax at the rate of 5% and without the benefit of input tax rate. Okay. Where do you find these expenses? You will find generally in traveling and conveyance expenses. Okay. Next. Okay, so now if you import any services from a person who is located outside India and you are in India, okay, then you are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Let's look at the logic, very simple. Okay, there is a company in HSR layout who will allow you to access their cloud storage services. Okay, and for that they're charging you 100 rupees per month. So you can upload your documents, your images, your pictures, anything, whatever you want to upload. Okay, because he is in India and you are in India, he will have to charge you tax. TGST, SGST, he will charge you, and you will have to pay him 18%. So the value of that service will become 118 rupees. 100 rupees is charges plus GST 18. Now, instead of you paying going to him, you go to Google. Now, Google charges you 100 rupees for 1 TB data. They charge 130 rupees, but just for sake of convenience. Okay, 100 rupees for 1 TB data or 100 GB data. Okay. Now, Google is located outside India. You will find Google cheaper than procuring services from an Indian entity, because Indian entity is going to charge you GST as well. Okay, so what you will do, you will avail the service of Google or Microsoft or Amazon, because they are not charging you GST because they are located outside India. So their government said, okay, we are losing revenue, and second, we are not giving equal footing to even the Indian vendors. So now the company who imports services from a person who is outside India, that company will have to pay, or the GST registered person will have to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism on all the amounts which he has spent for the purpose of importing services into India. Okay, is there a specific exemption? Whatever is the regular exemption available, if you have imported some services which are exempt from tax even in India, then you will get the exemption. But there's no specific exemption available here. Okay, once you pay the tax, you are entitled to credit. Yes, you are entitled to credit. Rate of tax 18%, unless you are bringing in some services where the rate of tax itself is 5%. Okay, what is the value on which you are required to pay tax? Whatever Google charges you. So assuming Google charges you $1, okay, and you account in your books at the rate of 70 rupees, okay, which is accepted by generally accepted accounting principles, then on 70 rupees that converted into INR, you will have to discharge tax rate of 18%. Okay, now who does not have to pay tax? If the place of supply is outside India. Example, you are in India, you are a company in India, okay, your employee went outside India and stayed in a hotel in USA. There the place of supply is the place where the immobile property is located. So the place of supply was outside India. You are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Second, if you are a non-taxable online recipient, that means you are an individual, you are non-taxable person. Okay. Even there, you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. There, a new concept called online information database access retrieval services, OIDR, will come into picture, where Google has to register in India for all the people who have not given their GST numbers, and Google will have to charge. Okay, so look at this. If Google renders services to you, you go to their page and start procuring their services, that is G Drive. Okay, they will charge you 130 plus GST. The moment you add your GST number, it will become 130, no GST. Your GST number is not a promo code, correct? It is only that now the responsibility to discharge tax has shifted on you. So government will get that 18%. If it is to unregistered person, Google will directly pay. If it is to a registered person, that registered person will pay tax to the government. Okay. Now, where do you find these expenses? Very difficult. Depends on the nature of expenses. You might have imported a software, so it might be in subscription charges. You might have availed the services of an architect, so it is sitting in architect fee. You might have taken an opinion from a lawyer, so it might be sitting in a legal services. Okay, so depending on the nature of expenses. One very important thing which you have to note here is that if there are any credit card payments for purchase of software or in foreign currency because the director has gone outside, please be very careful. What are those expenses? Can the place of supply be traced to India? If yes, even though the director has swiped his credit card, because that expense is sitting in your profit and loss account, you are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Also, in the notes to accounts, there is a specific disclosure of all the expenses which are incurred under foreign currency. So please have a look at that. There also you will get a fair idea of what are the expenses which have been booked under foreign currency. Goods you can remove, because import of goods you have to pay customs duty. On import of services you are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Last service, I am not leaving you. After last service we have some more discussion also, and then I will take up your questions. Okay. Ocean freight, where you are moving the goods from one country to India by way of a vessel, that is a ship. Okay. And you are the importer, then you are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Now there are a lot of litigations around it. That point number one, already I have paid customs duty on this freight because customs duty is applicable on CIF value. Why are you asking me to pay tax again? Okay. Second, I am not even making the payment to the vendor. I have entered into an all-inclusive contract where my vendor is required to check with the foreign shipper, and my vendor is required to send the goods to me on CIF basis. For me, I don't even know what is the freight value. Why should I even pay tax because I'm not even the recipient? Okay, so there are a lot of issues around this ocean freight, right? So this case went on up to Supreme Court in Mohit Minerals case. The Supreme Court has not given a very clear judgment, I would say, as far as FOB is concerned. So if it is a CIF transaction, that means it is a freight and insurance included transaction, you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. But if you are getting the goods on FOP basis, whoever might have paid the transportation charges, you have to, or the convey, vessel hiring charges, you have to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Now, how do I identify whether I've imported the goods or not? Go to your 2A. You don't even have to go to books of accounts. All the import of goods, see the shipping port. You will be able to find out which is a consignment which is come by ship, which is a ship consignment which is come by air. Those ship transactions, you will have to see whether it is FOB or CIF. And on the CIF, you can ignore. On FOB, you are required to pay taxes. Okay. What is the rate of tax? Here, the rate of tax is only 5%. I'm sorry, I've written that credit available as not available. That's a typing error. That's actually credit is available. Whenever I'm sharing the PPT, I will change that and share it. Okay. What is the value? Actual value of freight, but there could be cases where you don't know because somebody else, the freight forwarder, Indian freight forwarder is involved. So you don't know the freight value. In that case, 10% of the CIF value will be deemed to be the freight value on which you are required to pay tax. So on the 10%, 5% will be the tax which you'll have to discharge. Mohit Minerals case we have already discussed. Where will you find this expenditure? In your purchase account, or you will find it in transportation invoice. Next. So with this, I finished the specific categories of services. Few categories I have intentionally not taken, like recovery agent, insurance agent, banking services, because that is not very relevant for us on a day-to-day basis. Okay. Also, I have specifically not covered RCM in case of developers and landowners, because that's a topic in itself. I'm sure we will in the future organize a separate session specifically for works contract and real estate transactions in relating to joint development agreements. Okay. Now, few additional points which I would want to highlight here is, what is LLP? Is it a body corporate or is it a partnership firm? So there is an express explanation which has been given as part of the notification, which says partnership firm includes LLP. So for the purpose of GST, LLP and partnership firm are same. For Companies Act perspective, I am told LLP has a separate life. So LLP is treated on par with companies. Okay, but for the purpose of GST, wherever they've used the word body corporate, LLP will not get included. So if you are an LLP and you have received services for which GST is liable under reverse charge mechanism, if you are a body corporate, you are not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism because you are not a body corporate for the purpose of GST. Okay. Now, how do you identify transactions which are liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism? Very important point. Forex remittances. Next, your specific expenses which we discussed. Please look at your vendor invoices. Okay. Also, I think I've missed this point or I've placed it somewhere else. Please look at your GSTR 2A 2B reports, where very clearly there is a column whether this transaction is liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism. Please filter all that. These are the cases where the vendor has uploaded his GSTR 1 saying I will not pay the tax. The recipient is required to pay the tax. So please be careful about those transactions. Okay. Related party transactions, especially transactions with director and foreign companies, you may not even have agreed for a consideration, but transactions with related parties or distinct person does not require consideration. As long as there is a transaction, you are required to pay tax on the same. I am sure all of you, or at least majority of us, would have received notices on corporate guarantee, directorship services, director guarantee, intercompany loans. That is because they are invoking those provisions of consideration not required when the transaction is between related parties. Now, we have a totally different defense mechanism for that, that is not a service at all. Okay, but that apart, I am saying please be careful when there are related party transactions, because in case of import of services, consideration, even if it is not there, I am required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Right. Next. Now, another question, 1718 audit is going on. The department has identified certain transactions where I'm required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Now, 1718 last date for availing the credit was March 2019. I am paying the tax now by way of DRC 03. Can I claim the input tax credit? Trust me, nobody knows the answer, including me. But only one argument is available, so this matter has to be litigated. Only then we will be able to identify whether credit can be claimed or not. One argument is all the input tax credit can be claimed only based on a document. Okay, all the input tax credit. If it is import, I have to claim the credit based on bill of entry. If it is input service distributor, based on the ISD invoice. If the vendor has charged me tax, based on his invoice. Okay, RCM I can claim the credit only based on a self invoice. That means I have to raise invoice on myself. So if I'm raising the invoice on myself today, that means the tax has also been paid today. That means the time limit starts from the date of the document, which is today, and not 1718. So I'm entitled to claim the input tax rate. That is the only argument available based on which there will be a big litigation, and based on which it will be decided whether we are entitled to claim the credit or not. Till the matter is decided, please claim the credit. Okay, and then we will see if we have to reverse the credit in the subsequent period, if the depending on whether the judgment is in our favor or it is against us. Okay. One check you can do is also the credit which you are claiming. Okay, check month on month in total cumulatively. The credit which you are claiming under RCM cannot exceed the payment which you are making in RCM. One control check you can have. Like I said, the 2A point was there somewhere else. Also check on a back. Also check whether in 2A whether there are any transactions which have been reported by your vendor under reverse charge mechanism or not. Okay. Then self-invoicing, I am not sure how many companies are doing this, but in case of reverse charge mechanism, I am required to raise an invoice on myself. Okay, so whenever audit comes, they can ask for documents relating to RCM. Please raise the invoice and keep it in your records. Okay, it's really very important. Okay. Next. So with this, I finished my presentation. You can see a QR code on your screen. You can scan that QR code and you'll get automatically added to our WhatsApp community, where we keep sharing a lot of details relating to GST write-ups or any LinkedIn post which we have commented on the tax position. So feel free to get added to our community to get latest alerts on GST. Okay. These are the points which I wanted to cover. I'm sure the chat box will be filled with a lot of questions. So I will just now focus on the chat box. Give me a minute till I access the chat box. Just a second. Yeah, I'll take from the beginning. Sachinda sir is asking GST rate for goods auto charges paid. Luckily, as of today, for auto, there is no tax under reverse charge mechanism or forward charge. It is only on motor vehicle. But if you book from Ola or Uber, okay, this auto is liable to tax, and Uber or Ola is required to discharge tax. This matters before Karnataka High Court. As to if I normally book the auto, there is no GST, but when I book it through a Ola or Uber, it is liable to tax. So it is distinct. It is a differential treatment which has been given, but the matter has not been decided. Right? Rubal has a question. What for the charges paid for stamp purchase? Stamp purchase is not a service which has been given to you, and so it is not liable to GST. Sir, what if the service charges are above 5,000, the turnover is below the threshold limit? CK sir, it is not liable to tax because the service charges are more than 5,000, but you have got an exemption under another entry. So all these entries are independent. If you don't fall under one exemption entry, you can fall under the second exemption entry, not an issue. What will be the place of supply in this case? I'm sorry, I'm not aware of this, Nishi. Which case are you talking about? If you can just highlight that, it will be easy. Sandeep has a question. An LLP has taken residential house for partner. No furtherance of business. Do the RCM will apply? So the moment it is taken by a LLP, it can, like we said, nothing is personal when it is by a LLP or a business entity, body corporate. For claiming input credit, we'll say nothing is personal, but for not paying tax, we'll say this is personal. LLP, when it takes, it is for the purpose of business, it will be liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism. I remember there exists a provision which makes it mandatory to register because he's liable to RCM. In such cases, service receiver in security services seems some contradiction. So, interestingly, there is a contradiction between section 24, which says if you are liable to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism, you are mandatorily required to obtain registration. And section 23 says cases where you are not required to pay tax, you are not required to obtain registration. So the question was whether 23 will override 24 or 24 will ride over 3. That issue has been answered in this budget, where they have amended section 23 to say 23 is notwithstanding 22 and 24. That means even if I'm required to mandatorily pay tax under reverse charge mechanism, but if I've covered under 23, which says you're not required to obtain registration, then 23 will prevail over 24. I am still not required to obtain registration under the GST law. And of course, that follows that I'm not required to pay taxes as well. Okay. GTA taking vehicle on rent covered under RCM or FCM are exempt. Abhinandan, there is a specific exemption. If GTA takes the vehicle on rent to provide GTA services, then it is exempt from tax. Import of services by SEZ unit, will it attract RCM? There is a import of services. I think there is a notification itself which clearly says that import of services by RCM is not liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism. If company is paying rent to URD for go down purposes, is RCM applicable? Like I said, merely because it is being paid to a URD, it is not liable to tax. Is it a residential property used for commercial purposes? Then RCM is applicable. But if it is a go down, which is a commercial property, which is used for commercial purposes, RCM will not apply. If URD has a turnover more than 20 lakhs, tomorrow he will have to get registered and pay the tax. But I am not required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Shankar sir has a question. So far, we have paid RCM on freight at 12% avail ITC. You have paid a higher rate of tax and claimed the credit, but I would suggest you can start paying tax at the rate of 12%. As of now, no issue, because in service tax also there are a lot of cases where they say if the government has accepted the tax, then they cannot deny the input tax credit. For sponsorship services, if recipient is raising invoice on forward charge basis, are there any issues? I think you're talking from sponsorship services if supplier is raising invoice on forward charge basis. So again, that same service tax cases will come into picture, that if government has admitted tax on the amounts which have been supplied on the invoices raised by the supplier, they cannot deny the credit in the hands of the recipient. But the point is it leads to unnecessary litigation. So you can speak to your vendor and say you stop paying the taxes. I will pay the tax under reverse charge mechanism. But for whatever transactions already taken place, please take the input tax credit. I think I've covered all the questions. If there are any other questions which you want me to answer, I can. This presentation will be shared to the registered email address which you have given at the time of registration. Thank you very much, everyone. I don't see any other question. You anyways have my number. Please feel free to message and I will be more than happy to answer any of your queries. Thank you very much, everyone. Rubal, you have a question. In case of sea freight, always liable to RCM, even CIF or not? No, like I said, CIF, we can always take the benefit of Supreme Court's judgment. In case of Mohit Minerals, where they say that it is not liable to tax, it's constitutionally not valid. On FOB, the judgment does not talk about anything, so we'll have to continue paying taxes. Okay, Deepthi has one more question. These are the only notified services RCM applicable, or other than these, any services are applicable? Like I said, few services which were not relevant for our discussion, which does not come in a day-to-day activity, I have not covered. Like what you say, not intermediary, I'm sorry. Like agent, insurance agent services, or recovery agent services, or a music composer. Okay, so all those I have not covered. But other than that, majority of these services I have covered, which we use on a regular basis, I have already covered. Okay, I can see a few more questions. 1 second. I think I missed this. In case of directorship services, if the director is in Delhi and the company is in Karnataka, is the company supposed to pay RCM? So whatever the supplier would have charged, you would have charged IGST if you are liable to pay tax. That is the tax which has to be discharged. So in this case, Nishi, in your case, you will have to pay tax under IGST. RCM to pay on ocean freight, like I said, only on FOB transactions. GTA to the GTA services, whether exempt from tax, in one transaction, there can be no two GTAs. So when one GTA renders GTA to another, it means he is providing lorry on rent. And when he is providing the lorry on rent, there is a specific exemption which says vehicle given on rent to another GTA will be exempt from tax. Nishi has another question. Directorship question. Both are registered in Delhi and Karnataka. Okay, so I have covered that. Is RCM applicable on business promotion expenses? No, only sponsorship services. Jairam sir has another question. Is there ITC available to body corporate on residential property rental availed for director? Yes, I believe it is for the purpose of the company, and so the credit will be available. If I hire driver for personal purpose and manage, then don't need to pay RCM. But if I hire driver for business purposes, then I need to. Perfect. That is what you are required to do, Poonam. I think with this I've covered all the questions which were posted to me. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks a lot. We will be having these sessions monthly once. So please attend in good numbers, and maybe you can ask your colleagues also to join. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.